Welcome to the Property Couch, where each week you get to listen to two of Australia's leading property experts. Bryce Holdaway, co-host of Location Australia on Foxtel's Lifestyle channel, and Ben Kingsley, chair of Property Investors Council of Australia and the 2014 and 2015 Property Investment Advisors of the Year.
All right, folks, you're on the Property Couch where each week he and I bring you the insider's guide to property, finance and money management. Here we are, Ben.
Here we are, Bryce.
Jeff Shedd,
Property Buyers Expo in Melbourne.
We're just wrapping up 3 really good days down here.
Been busy. The voice is a little bit drawn out.
I'm all talked out, but we were lucky enough to get Greville Pabst to come and join us, Ben.
How good. He's coming back.
He is coming back.
We didn't have enough time to get all the gold out.
We didn't.
So we're going to have to do more with that.
So Ben, my mindset minutes today is you and I we're about to take a bit of a break.
We are
with our family, so with anticipation. So
yes,
I'm going. Happiness is more likely to come from the enjoyment of experience, rather than the accumulation of stuff.
100%.
So
it's proven.
It's the anticipation that's coming. Now I've said this in my mindset minute in various forms, but I just wanted to say that I think it's a worthwhile one to remind ourselves of, because the anticipation I've got from taking a break away is better than anything that I've accumulated.
There's a little bit of stress in there. We've got everything, got the passports, got everything packed, you know, is everything dog looked after? Yeah, but overall, there is an excitement element to what the holiday is going to deliver.
Exactly. So, hopefully that helps you folks. But we are going to cut now to a wonderful interview that we did with Greville Pabst. It was good, wasn't it, Ben?
He's phenomenal, very talented, 35 years as a valuer, got a wealth of knowledge, wealth of experience, and happy to share it with us. And
the thing is, he unpacked the valuation process, and we're going to bring that to you. We're really excited about bringing that to you. But Ben, before we do that, we've got an upcoming webinar.
We do.
The 7 deadly sins
of
building a property portfolio.
Love it.
So we want you to come and register for that. We're going to have the link in the show notes. It's going to be really great. Last time we did it, Ben, it was packed house.
It was.
So we recommend that you register straight away and then turn up early. And the best experience, Ben, is to watch it on a desktop computer. Rather than a mobile phone.
It wouldn't quite work on a mobile.
Well, it does, but you get a better experience on a desktop.
Well, but you get to enjoy Ivis's graphics.
Ooh.
Like, you know, she produces these amazing PowerPoints.
Well, it's funny you say that, because we've just been here at the Property Buyers Expo, and she's going, but no one talks about these wonderful slides that I built, and they actually were.
We throw it in there. I've got her all, you know, she's behind the camera right now. She's all a little bit shy.
But there's one.
A giggle.
There's one for Stiggy. There's one for Stiggy.
Move on.
But Ben, this was a really good interview, and we should cut to it right now. All right, folks, you're on the Property Couch. Where are the Property Couch listeners? Just by a show of hands. Yep. All right, and the rest of you, hopefully by the end of today, we can encourage you to look at the Property Couch, which comes out weekly, Ben.
G'day.
At 3 o'clock. But welcome, Ben.
That's really loud.
Yeah, not anymore.
Not anymore. That's good.
Yeah,
how you going?
I'm very good.
I'm very happy, mate. Pies are up by 35 points after the first quarter. So I'm here. I'm tuned in. I promise I won't look now. Now that
most of the people in the room, Ben, have got 2 teams, right? Their own and the one playing your team. So it's certainly probably the case here. But we're very lucky today. We've got a very special guest, Greville Pabst. Some of you who's seen Greville on The Block as one of the guest judges? Who watches The Block here out of interest? Wonderful. Okay, who's not prepared to answer any questions I asked this afternoon? Let's just get that out of the way. Greville's purchased and valued thousands of properties on behalf of his clients at auction or by private treaty. He's a licensed property valuer, meaning he knows exactly how much you should pay for your property. Welcome, Greville.
Thank you, Bryce. Thanks for having me.
It's a pleasure. Hey, you own and manage one of the bigger valuation companies in Melbourne. But before we sort of get into the technicalities of what the valuation industry looks like, can you give us a bit of a backstory on how you initially got involved in property and what was the seed that planted that interest for you?
Yeah, well, I left school, didn't know what I really wanted to do, to be honest, and I suppose like many teenagers, I finished year 12 and somehow I found my way into property valuation. So that was back in 1983. And I've basically been in property now for 35 years, if you do the math. So did the valuation course at RMIT and did that and finished that, and then went to work with a couple of real estate agencies in the city, Fitzroy's being one of them, and Burgess Rawson, both retail, commercial agents in the city. And and then did a cadetship with Westpac Property Finance. So it was a really interesting time to learn, because that was back in the late 80s when we had the biggest commercial property boom that I think I'll ever see. And then the biggest property crash I think I'll ever see in my lifetime as well, in 1990, where commercial property values halved in value. I try and tell that to my sons who are interested in property, and they just can't believe that property can fall. And I suppose that's a great illustration that it can.
Yeah, it's interesting. I remember talking to someone who had come and sat down with me and had just experienced some of the property crashes in the UK, and looked at me and said, "Why do you have this, unshakable belief that property will continue to grow?" And I said, "Well, look, whenever there's noise, I go to the facts and I talk to that." But you could see in his eyes that he had experienced what it looked and felt like to have properties sort of plummet. And I guess for most people in Australia, they haven't experienced that. So it's something that we've had, the most economic growth without a recession of any of the developed economies around the world. So it's something that people aren't used to, but it's something that you've seen yourself.
Yeah, definitely. And so I got retrenched in that recession from Westpac, 1990 to 1995. Got retrenched and couldn't find a job. So in those days, so it started up WBP Property Group, and this is our 26th year in business, and sort of felt that I never wanted to get that tap on the shoulder again. So I started my own business, and now, as Bryce said, we're the fourth largest property valuation group in Australia, have offices in every capital city, and we do about 800 property inspections every day. So it's about 260 staff, and we do buyer agency, vendor advocacy as well as another business line.
So if you're thinking about who's got their finger on the pulse in the market, someone who's doing 800 inspections and possible valuations a day through his network, so 260, so how many of those? About 200 valuers?
There's about 180 valuers.
180 valuers. So this is our opportunity to sort of take a bit of a deeper dive into the process of evaluation, because there's different types of valuations you can get. You can obviously get a bank valuation, which is usually what's going to happen when you get a loan application going in. They want to value that property. And what's the difference between that, Greville, and that to me engaging you as a valuer to do a full valuation on my property privately?
I think there's a couple of reasons people get valuations, and really it's for a statutory purpose. You get a valuation not because you really want one, because an estate agent can often give you a fair opinion of value, and you get 3 opinions from a real estate agent, you're going to get a fair idea. So to get a valuation, essentially a bank will do one because you're borrowing money. So that's probably one of the first reasons. The second reason, unfortunately, if you separate from a partner, you get divorced. So the family law court is we get a lot of valuations through that process. Of course, rating and taxation, capital gains tax purposes. If you buy a property for investment and then you sell it, there's capital gains. So often we're called in to do that for accountants, solicitors. But really, I think it's really difficult because valuation is almost a single point estimate. So before you're buying a property, I often don't recommend to my clients to get a valuation, funnily enough, because I think when you're buying property, you actually need to have a range in value, and valuers are actually always looking in the rear vision mirror. So they're always looking at the sales that have occurred 3 months ago, 6 months ago, in order to provide the evidence to justify their valuation. Now, as we know, the property market can move pretty quickly, and it can change pretty quickly. So having sales 6 months ago, 3 months ago is really not that relevant when you're buying a property. So I always say that there's 2 things when you're buying a property. There's technical value, which is what a valuer does. Secondly, there's a thing called market sentiment. And that market sentiment can carry a property's value, plus or minus its technical value, depending on sentiment at the time and depending on emotions and so forth. So I think you can't go in to an auction or to buy a property and be so rigid. Okay, you actually have to have a strategy beforehand. I think that's really important. You have to understand values, and like these guys do every day, is you actually have to, I think, engage somebody who's independent from the agent in that process, because an agent, of course, is paid by the vendor. So in the US, nobody buys a property unless they first engage a buyer's agent. And I think whilst in Australia that is still very, very young and immature as an industry, it's starting to grow, and I think more people will pay for advice in the future because property's not simple anymore, right? It's 30 years ago no one lived in the city. Right? Melbourne was a donut city. Everybody lived out in the outer suburbs. Mount Waverley was the centre of Melbourne. But that's all changed. Now people are actually living in the CBD itself, and these properties that people are buying, they're highly specialised properties. And you can make a mistake, particularly when you're buying off the plan, or you're playing with, the median house price is $800,000. I always say to my clients, you go and buy a car, you get checked out by a mate who might be a mechanic, or you get RACV. You buy stocks or shares, you get advice from a stockbroker. You buy fine art, the same thing. But it seems that in Australia, everybody thinks that they're an expert in property. I don't know why that is. I think it's because they live in a house. I don't know, but I think it's really
absolutely got something to do with it. I mean, the fact is that we've grown up in the asset, so we know it and we understand it more. Whether that's blind faith or blind knowledge, or a little bit of knowledge is dangerous. But you're absolutely right, Greville.
When you have the median house price in Melbourne now, depending on which research house or data source you use, it's a touch over $800,000. Now that's a lot of money to gamble with, and particularly if you're a young person, you can't afford to make a mistake. If you make a good decision when you're young, it'll set yourself up for life. But if you make a poor decision, it'll set you back. It's a little bit like, it's a bit like fast food, I suppose. You can have a healthy choice, or you can have a quick takeaway fix and you feel like crap afterwards. Well, it's the same with property.
So Greville, I want to touch on technical valuations. As a valuer, what are you looking at when you're doing a technical component of the valuation process?
Well, can we even go further back? What does a valuer do? You said you did 800 a day. They get in the car first thing in the morning. Can we go 101 valuation so everyone can understand what the mechanics are and then sort of lead into the technical?
Well, certainly technology's changed the game now, and for the better. But essentially, a valuer will make an appointment. They'll attend a lot of the actual groundwork is done before they get to the house, because most of my valuers are doing 8 to 10 valuations every day, and that's a lot. So they have to be organised. So they have everything on a tablet computer. They go through the house and essentially they collect data. So they're checking the land measurements, making sure that they comply with the title. You'd be surprised how many people don't do that anymore, and how often the physical dimensions of the land don't accord with the title. Right? Fences are in wrong spots. Somebody's grabbed a bit of the laneway at the back without telling anybody. There's all these things. So they check all those things, take some photos in and out, because the banks require us to take 5 photos inside and out. They want to see what they're lending on. And we go through and we take a description of all of the rooms, physically measure up the building as well, do a floor plan. There's a template that the banks require us to fill out, and essentially we're collecting data. That's the big thing now is data. So we're collecting a lot of data. The valuer then goes away, and I like to think they have a whole bunch of sales evidence on their tablet, which is properties that have sold that are similar to the subject property. And then they drive around and they actually go and look at those properties that have sold, similar properties in the same street, the same neighbourhood, really tight areas. And then I like to say it's comparing, they compare apples with apples, but they make adjustments for the bruises. Okay, so they're comparing a sale of a single story with a single story, that you're not comparing a two-story sale with a single story. You're comparing land size that's similar, building sizes that are similar, condition that is similar, and make those adjustments. Essentially, it is the land that often makes up 60, 70% of the value of the property. So often we'll look for an infill a land sale so that we can establish what the benchmark value is for land. There's often an old house that's going to be demolished and the buildings don't really add any value. So good indication of land value by looking at those sales. And then taking the depreciated value of the building and adding that to the land as a check. But that's called the direct comparison approach. So often it's a dollar per square metre rate of comparing building size with the building size of the comparable sales. Often that's applied strictly to the building, but often as a land rate as well as a comparison. So I suppose in very simplistic terms, that's called the direct comparison approach. Sometimes with investment properties, we'll look at what that property can rent for in the marketplace, and as a check, you can adopt a capitalisation rate or a yield and apply that to the rental to get your capitalised value.
Is it important to be conservative when you're giving those valuations? Because what if you were to come up with a unique property that you knew that had very little comparable sales for you to compare to? So on paper it's hard to justify, but you know yourself being a valuer but also being a buyer's agent, you know if it went to market, you know that there'd be 3 or 4 people interested and the market would probably get a healthy price. How does that sort of thought process go through for a valuer trying to put something on paper for a valuation that they know doesn't have a lot of evidence to support?
Yeah, it's tough if there's not the evidence, and sometimes a valuer will have to go on the other side of a road or another side of a railway line, or even in an adjacent suburb. And sometimes if we're valuing a $15 or $20 million trophy home in Toorak, we might have to look at other trophy homes outside of Toorak. We might have to look at, because there aren't that many sales of that type of property. If we're valuing commercial properties, supermarkets or shopping centres, the search for comparable sales might go nationally because we're trying to establish that comparison. The comment there on conservative, it's off. It's a funny thing. It's often that valuers are said that we're conservative, and I suppose it's an interesting comment because we don't set the benchmark. Okay, the benchmark is actually set by sales that have occurred in the past. Those sales have to be within 6 months. So we're not actually setting any levels of value ourselves. We're actually basing the current valuation on what has occurred 3 months ago or within the last few weeks. So I suppose, are we conservative? It's only based on the interpretation of the sales that have occurred.
So, Greville, you say that. I mean, in a running market, we can see property prices move really quickly. So how much up-to-date data do you get, or do you have to rely on settled property prices as your statutory comparison? Because you might have seen it at auction on the weekend and bang, it's like going up $10,000 a week, and you're sort of sitting there going, off a $300,000, $400,000 base. That's a big number. Are your valuers able to use that discretion, or do they validate some of the more later properties, as opposed to what can happen is the data could be 2 months, 3 months old?
Yeah, so there is a requirement by the banks is that we have to provide 3 settled sales. But in the comments section of our reports, if, to your point, Ben, if there are sales that have occurred last week, and we'll obviously collect those sales as well. We don't just rely on the Valuer General's data. We do have feeds of data come in from CoreLogic, on a regular feed basis. So those sales are taken into account as well.
Now, the last thing that you also mentioned, some of us may have actually been able to have seen a bank valuation. You talk about the bruises, and there's also some risk ratings that they have down the bottom of some of those standard valuations. Do you want to share with the viewers and the listeners in terms of a bit about what those ratings mean for the bank in terms of their appetite to lend against those properties?
Yeah, thanks, Ben. I haven't done a valuation for about 10 years, I think. But,
Sorry, mate,
I can give you. I can't remember the whole 5, but I can give you some. I can give you some ideas of the type of things that that really come to mind. I suppose one of them is there's a box that we tick on environmental factors, and we've got to give a rating 1 to 5. So if you've got a And this comes back to the selection of property. I think as investors and as buyers of property, I see some horrendous decisions that people make, right? And I think, what the heck? What were you thinking? But
but I was under competition. There were 5 other buyers on that property.
Well, what's an example of what you're thinking?
So yeah, I mean, if I go to a property and there's a transmission, a high tension transmission line, within 100 metres of the property. And don't tell me they don't exist, because they're everywhere, right? Like in Doncaster and those areas, there's lots of those. And, so straight away, I might rate that a 4 or 5 for an environmental risk. If there's an industry that is, as it's one of the other boxes, is there changes in the economic conditions of the market, which we're probably, now we would tick that box separately, because we're definitely seeing a change in values right at the moment. So that's going to be another risk factor that the banks want to know. One of the others is the property, is it loaded? Is the price loaded? Is it a 2-tier market? Is it within an area where a local industry has closed down? Has the sawmill closed down in that little country town, or has Ford closed its manufacturing plant in Geelong? These are the sorts of things that the banks want to know before they'll lend on property.
Do you ever take into account that you look at a valuation, you look at a contract of sale and you see it's an interstate owner on a interstate property? Does that ever come into? You talked about 2-tier before. That happened a lot in Queensland, where they'd sell them at 2-tiered prices. Yeah. Is that something that comes into a valuer's mind?
Yeah. Look, when we get contracts of sale, and we do, it's really important just not look at just the property value, but look at the relationships between the vendor and the buyer, and to look at where the buyers are from. In some respects, that does have if they're interstate buyers in a development, or overseas buyers, there's some, and depending upon how those properties have sold, if it's through a traditional agent, generally I have a lot more comfort. But if it's through the sales are through a marketeer, through a developer, through it seems that all these offices of Spruikers are in St Kilda Road. I don't know why, but if I see that, just warning bells go up.
And I think it's a really valid point. I mean, some of the other things that you often experience is selling agents, promoted a property within a price range, and it flies $100,000 over that price range, and you're going, how does that happen? And I see a lot of frustration from first home buyers who have done their research, because unfortunately that property is probably going to have a different land use inside the next 12 months. In other words, they're going to knock that house over and maybe put a duplex on it, or put a bunch of townhouses on it. What's the approach the valuer has to take in that situation, Greville?
So can you just repeat?
Yeah, so the example would be a freestanding house, 800 square metre block, anywhere in Australia, which is subject to council approval to be able to be developed. We sit there thinking we're going to buy a home, we put our heart and soul into getting it, and then the builder guy or the developer just starts putting his hand up when everyone else is about to stop, and it runs for another 100,000 because they've done their feasibility on having 3 on that site. So the future land value of that and what the profit they're going to make, they're going to pay overs for that particular property in that time, aren't they?
Yeah, look, and that's right. If a builder's going to buy that property, it's not so much about what the value is now for that buyer. It's about what is the value going to be in the future. So if you're an owner-builder or a builder buying that property, straight away, you've got about a 10 or 12, that builder's got a 10 or 12% margin better than what you have, because that's generally a builder's margin on a small development like that, 10 to 12%. He can absorb that as he's doing it himself. We, the normal buyer in the marketplace, can't. Look, sometimes the permit adds value, sometimes it doesn't, depending on the supply of property in a particular market. So if there's an oversupply of high-rise apartment developments, just because a block of land has a permit for 50 or 100 units, if there's no demand for units, the value of that permit is zero.
How do you approach, so we talk a lot on the podcast, and we know that, outside of your valuation business, you're in alignment with us in terms of what makes it for an investment grade property. But a lot of people we talk to end up buying off the plan, medium and high density. What's the approach that the valuer takes when you've got someone who's, in good faith, bought an off the plan property, they thought it was the right thing, and then they want to revalue against it so that they can go and do something else? Is there any particular things that the listeners and the people here today should know about what happens when a valuer goes into a high density property and they try and, or sometimes not even be able to stack it up against the original purchase price?
Okay, if there's one takeaway from today, this is it, right? We did a survey in our office against 1,800, so it's a reasonable size survey, 1,800 properties that we, off the plan, properties that we had valued in all sorts of developments in Docklands, South Bank, CBD itself. And in more than 50% of the cases, valuation came in lower than the contract price. And that differential has been 10, 15, sometimes 20%. Right? So we're talking about you buy a property off the plan, then it takes sometimes 18 months to 2 years before it settles, and then the banks send their valuer out. So it can take 18 months to 2 years. In that time, the whole market conditions can change. That's why it's so risky. It's so speculative in doing that. And this is what we're seeing now. People 2 years ago, when the apartment market might have been better, now government changes have taken place. There's all bank lending has tightened up considerably. I've got many examples of people walking away and just losing their deposits. So when that property settles, unless you've got another 10, 15% in your back pocket, when the valuation comes in short, you better find that, dial a friend or go to the bank of mum and dad or whatever it is. Otherwise, you're going to be in trouble. I've only seen probably 2 or 3 developments in Melbourne that are exemptions to that rule. Now, one is the Melburnian in St Kilda Road, and the other one is Clarendon in East Melbourne.
So, Greville, obviously that's very shocking. I mean, if we're talking, and put that into context, we pay $500,000 for an off-the-plan property. 10% is obviously values up at $450. 20% it values up at $400. That's $100,000 shy of what you've just put your hard-earned money against. That's pretty traditional for Melbourne. You've been doing this for 35 years. I've been sort of watching this market for 15, 20 years. Sydney's a little bit different to that. Have you done any sort of analysis on the Sydney market around units? Because their unit performance has actually been fairly reasonable compared to their freestanding houses or townhouses market as well.
Look, in some regards, they're similar. I don't want to put everything in the same box. Okay, I say to my clients that boutique, low density, generally less than 20 in a block, you're going to be better off. And this applies nationally, not just in Sydney. Keeping it into small type developments. I think what many people forget is that it is land that appreciates, buildings depreciate. It's one-on-one valuation. Okay, so in a high-rise block in Melbourne or Sydney and a tower, it is highly valuable land, but the land is so small that it simply cannot appreciate as fast as the stack of bricks above it is depreciating. So it's land that appreciates. And in my experience, from the contract price, quite often it's 6 to 7 years before that depreciation bleeds out of the property, before it gets back to breaking even. It's a bit like when you buy a car. As soon as you drive it out of the showroom, brand new car, it depreciates.
Greville, I've got an example, and I'm not going to name the building. I showed our staff an example of a I think they paid $520,000 for the property in 2007 off the plan, and it recently sold for $298,000 from 2007 until now. And that's on city fringe of Melbourne. So that's a horror story for that poor investor who's been, basically been waiting for it to come good, and it just didn't happen.
Well, that's why the podcast listeners, Ben, when we say location does 80% of the heavy lifting, it doesn't do 100, because that was in a ripping suburb and still had those poor results. Now, I'm going to throw it over to questions shortly that you can ask Greville. But before we do, and if you think about those questions, one of the things I always say when I'm doing a talk, such as here at the expos, is I always say that if you've got a buy and hold strategy, the most important person in the entire equation, if you have a buy and hold strategy, is the valuer. Because if you've got a buy and hold strategy, typically you want to hold on to it and you want to harvest the equity out. And the way that you harvest the equity out is you go to the lender, and the lender will send Greville out to go and value your property. So when you're buying a property, you should take into account the things that Greville is saying today, because he's the guy, or one of his team is the people that's going to go out and value your property to give a report back to the bank, who's ultimately going to give you the funds to release out, hopefully to buy another property, or at some point when you get to the end of the portfolio, it may be for a personal purpose. So, Greville, what are some of the things that you would consider as a valuer, or one of your team, where they go, this is a layup, this is so easy to value because they've done all the fundamentals right? What are those fundamentals from the eyes of a valuer?
I mean, these are, what I call them is attributes. Property attributes that add value. And as I said before, it's about good decisions or bad decisions. So generally, I won't buy on a main road, because there are some exceptions, but generally no, because of noise, traffic, disturbance. I know that properties with north-facing backyards perform better over time and appreciate better than properties with other orientations. I know that regular-shaped blocks perform better over time than irregular-shaped blocks. Now, it's not rocket science, but these are people I don't think about this when they're making decisions. I see the mistakes every day. Floor plan is another critical thing. Floor plan is critical. Is the bathroom at the back of the house? Is it the centre of the house where it should be? Those sorts of things are really important. Is if it's a one-bedroom flat, is the toilet, off the master bedroom? I don't know about you, but if I own a one-bedroom flat and I'm having some folks over for dinner, I don't want them going through my bedroom to go to the toilet. Right? I want to have a separate toilet. These are small things. Right? I don't want the toilet, opposite the kitchen when the cabbage is boiling on the stove. Right? These are little things, but they make a difference. They really do make a difference. I think the most important thing is the relationship for a property to a village. If you can walk to a railway station, you can walk to a lifestyle attribute that is critical. The size of the property is also. Many may not realise that a bank won't lend on a property if it is, some cases, less than 40 square metres or less than 50 square metres. Many banks won't lend on it. Now, if you haven't got that advice up front, you're going to be in a world of pain when that property comes up to settle. So I think the message is, get advice. Many of us, get some advice before you before you go out there and you sign on the dotted line.
Well, time's absolutely flown, but we've got a bit of time for anyone who might have a question for Greville. So you got one here?
So my question is that different valuers use different techniques or different rules to value a property? The reason I'm asking is, within a very short period of time, you can say within weeks, the two valuers valued a property and the price difference are more than 10%.
Yeah, this is an old chestnut. If you didn't hear it, you know, valuers have come up with different... Well, look, valuations are, you know, it's an art. It's not a science. So there will be differences. And the courts in Australia will allow for a 10% variance in price. So no two... If I go out and do a valuation, someone else is going to could come in 4, 5, 6%. If they're greater than 10%, you know, I challenge my valuers within our own office because... You know, and you really shouldn't be pulling a valuation back from, say, contract price within 10% because they're not guide, right? They don't. If something's sold at auction and it's, you know, within 5%, it should be at contract price. But it does happen. It certainly does happen. Sometimes valuers make mistakes like everyone else too.
So who else wants to ask a quick question? There's a book for asking that question. Yep, over here.
Okay, thank you for that. I really appreciated you sharing your experience. Let's say I found a property and the price says offers over $500,000, but I want to make an offer that's close to market value. What tips would you give me, I guess, from at home with just access to the internet to make an offer in that market value range?
Well, firstly, that's illegal now in Victoria. They can't have offers over. Agents can't quote that way. Look, I think the most difficult thing, I think, for all of us, you know, maybe not us three, but is what is the property's value? What if it is a private sale and the agent's playing a cagey game? You know, how do you know what is the price? Well, you know, price to me is secondary. I think the first thing that you need to establish with that agent is, okay, you've got this property for sale. What are the rules of the game? This is a game. Many agents play this like a game. You need to understand what the rules are. So I'm not going to just make an offer, and then that agent is then going to go off and play my offer up against somebody else, and we've all probably been there, playing this game with an agent with fictitious buyers, and so I don't ever do that. Right? So establish what the rules are. So what I mean by that, are you going to run, before I put any in the offer, are you going to run a boardroom auction? Yes or no? Are you going to give every buyer an opportunity to put in their best price first, and there's just one chance, and we all put in our... Once I know those rules, I can then work out what I'm going to pay in terms of price. I always think that... I know that never be too cute, right? Because I'll give the example. If I'm an agent and I get home after working a 10-hour day and I'm sitting on the beanbag watching TV. I've just got the microwave dinner out of the microwave, and I'm sitting down. The phone rings at 7 o'clock, and I get someone's on the line and says, the agent. Sorry, someone rings the agent and says, "I want to make an offer." His ask is, say, $500,000, and he says, "I'll give you $400,000." What do you think the agent? If I'm an agent, you know what I'm going to do?
He's going to say pretender.
I'm going to sit, hang up, and I'm going to go back to eat my dinner.
So if I can give one very, very quick tip for the beginners, it's simple. Quickly turn the question back to the agent and say, what have you comped this property against? Like, give me examples of the 2 or 3 properties that you've given to establish what you think it's worth. Yeah. That's a great starting point.
But if I go back to you and say, you're asking 500, I'll offer 490. So what I'm saying is, do your homework, but give your best price. You know, create some tension, so that the agent then is going to put his dinner in the on the bench, and then go around to the vendor and present an offer that he knows he's got a chance of doing that deal tonight. Take it off the market.
Yeah, very good. So I'd agree with Ben, because the professional, you put it back on them and say, what comps have you stacked it up again? They've got their professional pride on the line. But, folks, a couple of things. The time has absolutely flown. I think you'll all agree that it's been a terrific topic in terms of valuation and unpacking and having a look under the bonnet. So in a couple of seconds, we'll thank Greville. But
all right, how good was that, Ben?
That was great. Oh, how good is he?
He's good.
We're going to have to get him back on, Bros.
I know. Can you? Yep. When the organisers said that it was time up, I'm like, are we even in second gear here?
No, we need more than 30 minutes. It's obviously very clear to us that we need to, because when you've got a great talent like him who's sharing all of his knowledge, that's what we want to get out to the community. So it's
we didn't even get time to talk to him about his experiences on the block. He was the guest judge. We didn't even get there. But hopefully you enjoyed that, Ben. But we will look to get Greville on again to try and sort of go a bit deeper on the valuation process. Beautiful. But today my life hack, Ben, is we often go to events and we've got to mingle and we've got to network and we've got to... So if any of our listeners or our viewers are wondering, where should you stand?
I should stand back so we can see you, is the first thing.
When you enter the room, exactly.
Yeah, where should we stand?
But it's often, do I stand at the door where everyone's coming in? Well, no, everyone's sort of looking around at that point to see where they should go. Should I stand between, the middle of the room? Well, maybe not, because people are looking for, a beeline for someone. Yep. I think the best place to stand, if you're going to a networking event or somewhere where you don't know and you need to meet some people, best place to stand is where someone gets their drinks, Ben. As soon as they pivot, where they're about to pivot, that's where you should be, because that's the point. They've walked in, they've felt the room, they've decided where they need to be. As soon as they pivot with a drink, they're ready for a conversation.
Nice bit of gold.
That's where you should be. So that's my life hack for today. Ivis has given us the nod, so that works. What about did you know?
Did you know? Look, obviously, I've had a lot of time to prepare. All 30 seconds, so what do you think I did? I just said, give me a weird fact, Google. This is the weirdest fact that I found.
All right.
What's the difference in terms of time between twins being born? The longest recorded history between the first twin and the second twin being born. How many hours, days? You tell me.
Wow, that's a good one. Is it measured in days or is it measured in hours?
It's measured in days.
Wow. All right, I'll go 3.
Keep going.
4.
No,
7?
No
way.
Keep going.
How much?
Keep going. 87.
That is not true.
87 days, ladies and gentlemen, between the first twin being born and the second twin being born. So it's absolutely incredible. And if you think about it, because it does take a little bit to think about, obviously that first child must have been born prematurely, and then obviously they were able to keep the second child alive and grow that child and then deliver that child 87 days later. Incredible.
Wow, that is incredible. I did not know that. And what would have been worse if it was first one was in December and the second one was the following year? They weren't even born the same year.
No, they
didn't qualify for school the same.
Birthdays. It's going to be good. They get a little bit of time for themselves to shine the light on themselves.
It's one of your best, Ben. It's definitely one of your best. But there you go, folks. Hopefully you enjoyed that interview with Greville. We certainly enjoyed bringing it to you. And if you want to know about the valuation process, hopefully you've found out a whole lot more, because they're the most important person in the whole process, Ben, if you've got to buy and hold strategy. But until next week,
Bryce, knowledge is empowering, but only if you act on it.
See you next week, folks.